Having looked at the incredible work that goes on off the pitch in the last few weeks, it's time for Inside the Circle, the podcast, brought to you by our principal partner Vitality, to move back closer to the hockey field, as this week we turn our attention to the role of the goalkeeping coach. We are joined by none other than Mark Hickman, who was appointed as the national goalkeeping lead coach for England and Great Britain hockey in 2019. Since then, Mark has formed a close relationship with all of the goalkeepers in the international programme, working with them day in and day out. Joining Mark for this episode are Amy Tennant and Harry Gibson, and they talk about the impact Mark has had on them over the last 2 years, the importance of having a full-time goalkeeping coach, Amy's rather unique first meeting with him in Perth, and much more. Welcome to Inside the Circle, the podcast, and this week we are looking all about the life of a goalkeeping coach. So I'm delighted to say that we are joined by England and Great Britain's goalkeeping lead head coach in Mark Hickman, who works with both the men's and the women's team. And also joining today is England and Great Britain international Harry Gibson and England and Great Britain international Amy Tennant. So first of all, Hiko, welcome to the show. It's been pretty much, I think, just over 2 years since you first joined us over here. How have you found it? What's it like working with these guys?
Well, you have to say that I've come at an interesting time, hasn't it? Not only have I managed to hit Brexit, I've also managed to hit out, unfortunately, the global pandemic. So not only changing hemispheres, countries and programs, but being able to experience in different ways, you'd say certain sort of world events from a different perspective. Look, overall, it's been fantastic. I know that I'm obviously saying this with two of my people that I see every day below me, but every day is something that just fills your heart, because you see people that are absolutely trying to do their best, improve themselves and their team. And for me, that's the reason that I got involved in sport. Whether that was when I started in Darwin, which is in the Northern Territory of Australia, or why I'm involved now with the GB teams over here in the UK, is to be involved with people like that. So, overall, it's been fantastic, Will, and long may it continue.
And then, Amy and Harry, for yourselves, what's it been like working with Hicko for the last 2 years and having that permanent goalkeeping coach pretty much on tap for you to utilise whenever you want?
It's been fantastic. Like you say, we didn't have a permanent goalkeeping coach role before that, so our coaching was a little bit sporadic. The reign of John Hurst kind of coming to an end as he was looking to step away from it. Obviously invaluable, but again, we didn't have that consistency. So to get Hicko in, and someone with as much energy and enthusiasm for what he does as Hicko, but also to be able to see him on a daily basis and really put down a solid kind of daily work into your goalkeeping, which we just hadn't had before. That attention to detail and that energy has just paid off in spades. So yeah, from the men's side, definitely, like, we've seen a huge step forward in what we're doing and how we're approaching it, and I think that shows on the pitch. So yeah, it's been very good so far.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. I think, especially for me, prior to having a consistent goalie coach, I just kind of floated through, turned up to training, had fun, went home. And Hicko, especially, not just the fact we have a goalie coach, but Hicko specifically has provided structure and a focus in terms of my game, and I think probably the other two goalies as well, which has been really helpful because we were definitely lacking that beforehand. And obviously he's just a really nice bloke, isn't he? So that's fun as well.
Is that something you try to get across, Hicko? Because I've seen the way you work with both teams, and it's the training sessions I've seen you take, it's always a very much your focus always seems to be positive. There's always a positive that you try to take, and you seem to have such a good relationship with every single player, not just the goalkeepers but also the outfielders as well. Is that something that you particularly focus on in your approach? Is that something that just comes naturally to you?
Yeah, look, Will, it's an interesting question. I think for all of us, coaches, especially your personality traits are your personality traits, and they're probably seen both in the work sphere, which for us is coaching, and outside of that. That's probably what I'd think. And then specific to what I do, obviously my role is much more individually based. So whereas, our head coach may have 27 athletes on the field at any one time and is trying to work out various sort of tactical situations. I've got the good fortune to be working with the senior group anyway, which is probably 80% of my work, with 3 men and 3 women in terms of the team. So it demands a certain more personal touch, you'd probably say, but it also allows that because it's a smaller group. Now, in terms of the upbeat, the positivity, I love hearing that. I think it's always important to say, we have our challenging moments as well. When we set expectations, it's important to know that not every day do we come in and, finish the day thinking, geez, that was fantastic. That's the best day I've ever had in my life. We go through some challenging moments as well, because we are trying to improve ourselves. And that involves sometimes taking both myself, but also the goalkeepers into more a zone of uncertainty and certainly challenge. And that requires, probably coming back to your question, a certain underpinning that is built on trust and a real connection. So from my perspective, we've got to build that to begin with, to then be able to take the goalies on this journey, which sometimes will move into uncertainty, and you could say maybe a bit of that more feeling of uncomfort.
For Amy and Harry, do you sort of remember the first times you met Hicko? Do you sort of remember what your first training sessions were like? Any initial impressions or anything like that?
I met Hicko on Valentine's Day in Perth, and it was like the best day ever. Now we met, didn't we, on Valentine's Day on a nice river in Perth, and we just had a little coffee. It wasn't just me, don't worry. It was also Coco, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Amy, I'm glad you brought that up straight away so we can move on from it. That was a really interesting day. Obviously, at that stage, I was still in Australia and working with the Australian teams, and by chance, GB happened to be coming through Perth. So I took the opportunity to catch up with the men and the women on different days. If I'd done it all together, I probably wouldn't have created that problem for myself.
It would have been the best Valentine's Day ever with both, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but it probably shows you that I had very little idea about, Valentine's Day, the day of it, that type of thing, because I can just remember driving to go to the GB team hotel, and knowing that I was meeting both Coco and Amy. I was driving along the river. I was thinking, ooh, there's quite a few people on the river. Then I was thinking, oh, it's like, lots of little couples, and you could then see that there were some candles and stuff like that. And that's when I sort of clocked it and went, oh, right, it's Valentine's Day. Okay. So my initial thought had been, well, we might go down to the river because it was quite close to the hotel. After that, I thought, no, we've got to try and make this a bit more professional. So we'll find a cafe somewhere.
You bought a picnic with you. You had strawberries.
No.
Yeah, no, I remember we met in a cafe, didn't we, Hiko?
Yeah.
I remember you were a little bit skittish, kind of looking around like, any Aussies there? Got like a fake moustache on. But no, I remember being, impressed by the kind of attention to detail and the level of thinking and the stuff that he was already thinking about, even though we'd literally just met and he'd only just kind of decided that he was taking the job. So, yeah, I think that was, and going back to the positivity thing, I think it's definitely taken me a while to get used to that. I think it's not a particularly British thing to turn up to train every day and be like, hey, how are you, mate? It's like when I'm a little bit grumpy and a bit tired on like a Thursday, it's like, oh, hey, Hicko. But that's taken me a bit of getting used to, but it's definitely like like Hicko says, like as a coach, like that relationship's so important, and to be able to get into those kind of slightly, like he says, harder places, the more challenging places, you need to build that rapport and have that initial relationship, which Hicko does very well. So, but unfailingly lighthearted and positive, which is useful in a British team environment.
Something that both Harry and Amy mentioned there was that the time that you were appointed and you sort of were first meeting the guys, you were still sort of working in the Australian setup. How is that for you, and how was that for you, sort of transitioning from working with one international team to another with almost like no break in between?
Yeah, I mean, look, and whenever I reflect back, I'm being extremely fortunate. So I loved working for Australia. It was fantastic, and I certainly didn't leave because I'd grown tired of that, or I wanted to necessarily leave it all behind because I was sick of it. So I look back on it with fondness. I'm still connected to Australia, obviously, as the country, but also the hockey teams, because there are people that I've had a long relationship with that are still involved in it. But for me, one of the things that I always try to challenge our goalkeepers with is that we need to be thinking about how can we improve ourselves, to not be afraid's the wrong word, but to be excited about different challenges. And so that was the thing that attracted me about coming to the UK, living here, putting myself in a different situation, which would allow me to sort of grow and enjoy things from that perspective. And if I'm expecting that of players, goalkeepers, then certainly that's something that I've got to be able to model in my own personal life as well. So that was the reasoning sort of behind it. Gibbo makes a bit of a joke there around fake mustaches and that. I'd be important to say that Australia certainly knew at that moment that I was going to Team GB, but it was just that I was finishing off my sort of 6 weeks of finishing up with one team and moving on to the next. So in that respect, I was really lucky. I think I've moved from one world-class program, which was Australia, into another world-class program, which is GB. They share some similarities and there are some differences. And that's really useful and good from a professional perspective.
You're listening to Inside the Circle, the podcast. Something Mark spoke about there is finishing his playing career, and as a player he achieved a lot. Obviously an Olympic gold medalist amongst numerous other things. For you, Amy and Harry, when you hear you're going to work with someone who has achieved so much, both as a player and then as a coach, is that something that you particularly think much about, or is it just a case of you actually sort of wait till he turns up and it's his personality that you sort of click with, or do those sorts of achievements have an initial impact on you at all?
I think I would probably think of them not in relation to the fact he was going to be our coach, and more just like any athlete appreciating another athlete's career. Like, he achieved some incredible things, and I would always wait to meet a coach before I formed any opinions on what they're like or their coaching style or anything like that. So I think that definitely, like, I was impressed, but more like athlete to athlete relationship rather than athlete to coach.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I think Hicko as well. We've had this chat. Like, it's not, the game changes so much over time. Like, it's not exactly the same thing. The skills that he was using back then are not necessarily what we do now. Like, the sport's changed. But I think for us, it was just that, unbelievable that is more having someone around that has gone through that, has trained for however long, done all the work, gone to the Olympics and executed it under the most pressure to come away with a gold medal. Like, that pedigree is, exactly what we're looking to learn from, both from Danny, Russell gold medal. Like, we've had some great people on our team who have had that pedigree. So yeah, it's like Amy says, it's the respect to Hicko as an athlete. But then obviously the coaching side is like, okay, well, he knows what it takes to get where we want to go. And that, comes across in everything he does. And that's something that you have to respect massively.
And then for you, Hicko, how much then has the game changed, and how much are you having to adapt what you're doing as a coach, sort of as the years go by?
Yeah, again, it's absolutely correct. And you probably only notice it because these things happen in an iterative sense and slowly when I look back at, footage of me playing. And so I finished in 2004, that we're going on now for 16, 17 years. I don't think, day to day about those changes, but certainly if I look back at footage from the Athens Olympics, yeah, it looks very different to what Amy and Gibbo are experiencing on a day-to-day basis now. The rules have changed. The equipment has changed, so that's brought probably a speed element to it. Specifically for the goalkeepers, the ball is coming harder, and as happens, and one of the great things about high-level sport is that the athletes are in general faster, stronger, and more technically proficient than when I played. So you look around and you can't help but be amazed by that. And that's one of the things that I always say to the goalkeepers. These goalkeepers are better than me as a player. So I try never actually, and it's probably the first time that we're doing it with you, Will, is that I don't talk about, what I did as a goalkeeper, because to me that's irrelevant now, other than probably what Gibbo said, is that from a emotional perspective, I've maybe got that sort of feeling or understanding about what they might be going through at different times. But in terms of, your skills and things like that, things have changed. I've at times, for a bit of a laugh, sent a few things out to the goalies, and it has produced some laughs, because I'm certainly doing some things that when I coach them, I'm asking them, suggesting that it's probably not the best thing to do. One of the things with COVID is that we've had some restrictions around who can come into our training bubble. So, Amy's going to remember there's been a couple of days when I've actually had to put the pads on because we've had some injuries goalkeeping wise, and we've just needed sort of someone. And although size wise, I might be a little bit taller than Amy, and we've got some good photos of the difference in sizes. Skills wise, Amy was absolutely killing me. I was like really hurting myself trying to get around the pitch and do these things. And for me, it was a really important moment, because you start to, again, you're reminded about the challenge that is the position versus when you're a coach, and you can see things from a more objective perspective.
COVID's an interesting one, because if you think about it, you think of an outfield player, those first few months where you weren't even allowed at Bisham, you think of an outfield player, they can still pick up a stick and a ball and sort of work on their sharpness and their sort of hand-eye coordination things in their garden. But as a goalkeeper, you need someone there to help you with that, really. You can't do that by yourself. So how were those first few months for you as a coach, Hicko, and then for Amy and Gibbo as goalkeepers, those first few months where you couldn't actually even get to Bisham?
Yeah, I think it was probably divided into two parts. So the first part, where we weren't sure whether the Olympics would be postponed or not. So there was an element of, we're not allowed to train. What can we really do to try to sort of maintain things? Now, that was probably, in a coaching sense, the more stressful period. Once we'd moved to a point where we knew the Olympics were going to be postponed for a year, then it was maybe more around just the emotional elements and mental elements to it. So preparing the goalkeepers to understand that having a break is not a bad thing at times, and that we were going to gain when we sort of came back to being able to get back onto the pitch because we'd had that break. So I know Harry did quite a bit of work himself and completed an amazing challenge during that times, which I'll let him sort of talk about, that certainly was goalkeeper related. But specifically with a lot of the rest of the group, it was more, again, not worrying about the things that we couldn't do and just looking at staying fresh, enjoying, in inverted commas, that moment of not being on the pitch every single day, so that when we came back, we were going to be in a better spot for it.
Yeah, definitely. I'd echo that. I think, as soon as we heard the Olympics was postponed, it was a different kind of change. And I can't lie, I did nothing for a couple of weeks initially, because I just, it was an interesting one mentally. But then, like Hicko said, it was more about, right, what can we get done? And for me, it was like a focus on stuff that we never do. So I started running, which we never really get to do. So like longer runs, kind of building a base, just stuff that when we're fully in training is not an option. And Hicko alludes to that. Something that frustrates me about goalkeeping is exactly that, is that you can't just go and practice on your own. Like when I was a kid, like in the garden, taking free kicks, thinking I was going to be David Beckham, whatever, you can just spend hours like drilling that skill. Whereas as a goalie, like, apart from throwing a ball against a wall, you're a bit limited. So I did end up throwing a ball against a crazy catch as a way of staying sharp. And then my boredom, ended up doing that for 12 hours solid on a given day in lockdown for charity. But that's pretty much all you can do, like you say, without the help of a friend to hit hockey balls at you. It's you're a little bit limited as a goalie. I don't know what you found, Amy.
Yeah, I found the same, and I definitely just, like, I was going through rehab at the time, so I just did a lot of gym. Like, I like gymming anyway, so I think I just put all my energy into like getting fitter, getting stronger. And then there was a bit of the same, like throwing a ball against a wall, like Billy No Mates, I scored past myself a lot of times, so I'm going to throw it out there. But I do also remember, like, I guess for other goalies, I did do some coaching sessions. There's definitely things you can do on there with like kickers, like hand pads on. And I guess then it's just around the expectation. So that expectation that you're not going to be able to do much, but that's okay. Like, I trusted that the program would bring us back in an appropriate manner. So it wasn't really a worry necessarily for me. I'm not really a worrier anyway, so maybe that was part of the problem. But the program definitely brought us back in a very incremental way, which meant that we didn't necessarily have to worry about the fact we couldn't get a lot of hockey based practice in.
Did it also the sort of enforced break that make you appreciate how much that obviously you don't play hockey to train, but having that opportunity to even just get out there on the pitch and just have a bit of a hit about with Hicko, how much actually you do enjoy that as well?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think I definitely just like had missed everyone, and I was like, guys, it's so great to see you all. For me, it was definitely like the social element was what I probably most appreciated, going back to hockey and just like training with Sabs and Maddie and having fun and just taking the piss out of Maddie more than I probably should. But there's also like that physical side, the endorphins of doing exercise, kind of like, what's the word? Applying yourself mentally, which definitely I lacked in lockdown anyway. And like, I guess we probably wouldn't do it if we didn't enjoy the challenge of being an elite athlete.
Yeah, I think it went full circle for me, because initially with the pandemic and the kind of deaths and all the kind of mania of that, like it kind of puts it into perspective that hockey's not that important. What's important is people's health and society in a whole, and all these stuff that was getting brought up in the news and things like that, which actually kind of took me one way. And then as soon as we were back and it looked like we were able to train and go again, it then becomes like, oh, like I'm so grateful that I'm able to see my mates and everyone else is stuck at home, and like we get this opportunity. Like it was just full of gratitude for that. And to be honest, that's been right up until still now, when we're allowed to go to the gym and we're allowed to socialize like from a distance, but like with 30 people. who are in the squad. So it's that I've been extremely grateful for. So yeah, it's been a bit of a weird kind of shift. And I think although initially, my feeling was, kind of put sport on the back burner because it's not as important. But now as we see it opening up and people are so hungry for this summer's like sporting events that are coming up, like if we can manage to get to the Olympics and put on a bit of a show, like I think that would be so important for society as a whole. So yeah, it's kind of gone full circle for me, definitely.
And Mark, something I wanted to mention, but those first few months obviously meant you couldn't get out there and coach. But I wanted to ask you a question, because you do so much work. You're always at nearly always at the men's and women's training sessions, and you do extra sessions with the players, with the goalkeepers outside of their allotted sort of training times as a squad. Are you potentially the busiest person at England and Great Britain hockey? And if so, how do you find that time management?
I don't think I'm the busiest, and that'd be a bit over the top. I am generally, as you say, the men and the women's. Look, firstly, it's like everything, isn't it? And it can become a bit of a cliche, but if you're doing something that you enjoy, or you feel on one side a responsibility, but on the other side a passion for, then it's amazing how quickly things pass and you don't sort of notice that. The other side of it, you have to be sort of aware of that. And I'm not always at every single training session, and there have been moments where you say, look, probably I just need a bit of a break from this to be able to not hear Amy's jokes each day, or Gibbo's focus on the new book that he's reading, or something like that. And spend a bit of time sort of away from that. And that's really important. And something, again, that I emphasize with the goalkeepers is that to be able to get something out of a training session, you have to be in a certain sort of state. And if it's one of frustration and tiredness, let's say, you're probably not going to get something from that session. The quantity element can sometimes cannibalize sort of any quality that you want to get from it. So, that's something that I also try to do myself. I don't think I'm the busiest person. The busiest person, I would say, a lot of this has been our support staff that have been trying to manage not only both teams, a new set of whether that be medical or COVID sort of protocols to ensure that we can continue to train in a safe way, but have also been rapidly behind the scenes sort of trying to keep a program that's going to involve us in some ways being able to travel to play the games that we can play against other international teams. While I might be, a bit of a face to that, I suppose, because I'm with the athletes all the time, I reckon they're probably been the ones that have been the busiest and, just a little bit behind the scenes, but they're the ones that have been trying to, in some ways, make this program for us as coaches, but also for the players, seem as normal as possible.
Can I just say on that as well, to humble Hicko, but when we talk about us as players or athletes and then coaches, like being a goalie coach is being an athlete. Like Hicko has to hit the balls at us, and like it's not easy. Like there's three of us, each of whom need warming up separately, which involves Hicko hitting like 30 separate balls as hard as he can, because we're good. So like he's basically an international outfielder, like forward, who then does that for 4 hours a day. So it's not just a coaching role. Like he's an athlete.
And then you publishing things online when I fall over and things like that, though, obviously.
The choice of shoes, a bit of stability issue, but yeah.
One thing I always notice is that, I'm not at every single session, but some of the ways you bring in bits of equipment from other sports and the way you sort of set up your training sessions, and how much as a goalkeeping coach do you enjoy sort of coming up with different things to try out and different bits of equipment to utilize, first of all Hicko, and then following up for Amy and Harry? Sort of how much do you enjoy sort of the variety of things that are on offer, and are there any particular sessions or things that you've done that really stand out as being enjoyable or really beneficial? We'll go to Hicko first though.
Yeah, again, it's a really good and interesting question. One of the challenges is that if we start with what an international goalkeeper, it doesn't matter if it's Gibbo or Amy here, it's pretty much the same. In a single international game, they're probably only going to see the ball 7, 8, 9 times over 60 minutes. In that moment, they'll have to make a save, be it a penalty corner or something in the field. So numbers wise, it's relatively little, but it's at a high, at a moment of high emotion and high importance. So the challenge training wise then from that is that we can do a lot of stuff that is at the lower end, that can make us feel very confident, which is important, but at times won't replicate what we're going to face when we're out on the pitch. So involving the things that you sort of talk about, different props and stuff like that, helps in two ways. Firstly, otherwise it'd get a bit boring, both for me, I guess, as a coach, being selfish, but also for the players, because we do a lot of things that otherwise could seem very repetitive. And this allows us to do repetition without it seeming to be repetition, if you like that. And it enables us to also manipulate the difficulty. So adding things in which create obstacles in terms of your vision, how you can move, that type of stuff, while it might not be the same as playing the game, it allows you then to move your uncertainty and your difficulty from relatively low to much more difficult. And obviously I also love just smashing balls that deflect off things. I've been able to take some sort of classic catches at times as well with rebounds, but that type of stuff I enjoy. But it also creates, there's an important part there coaching wise for the goalkeepers, and that's that we need to be able to move them so that they're challenged, because otherwise a training session for 2 hours, the goalkeepers could face the ball as much as they would face in a complete tournament, say at the Olympics or something like that.
And then moving on to Harry and Amy, and the question I asked previously about sort of if there is any specific drills that you've done that you've enjoyed, or if there's anything that's stood out as being a bit different, a bit unique, because some of the things I've seen you do has been certainly not what I've expected.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's difficult. Like, kind of going back to the point of being able to train on your own, like we're trying to replicate a game that has 22 people on the pitch, and when if there's a long corner or whatever, most of those are in the D or around the 25, so it's hectic. But we're trying to replicate that with just the goalie and Hicko, so you have to add stuff in that therefore creates a bit of uncertainty, a bit of randomness, to kind of get the right signal. So yeah, you'll see us out there with traffic cones, with the deflector mats, with the, what's he called, Hicko, your mate?
Well, it's got a number of names. Amy, did you?
Well, we call it Unzi sometimes, don't we? And sometimes it's Leah. When it's in front of the goalie, it's Leah, because Leah likes to be a goalie. But I don't know what the boys call it.
Okay, it was Dave, wasn't it? What have you been calling it?
I've called him Bobby at times.
Bobby, yeah.
Is this the big sort of yellow mannequin?
Yellow man, inflatable man. Yeah.
Probably the gender neutral name.
Yeah. But yeah, so just anything that, for us, just adds a bit of uncertainty and randomness to it, that either you can't see the ball, or it deflects off, or it creates something. We've got a few nets that we use, don't we? And yeah, like Hicko's been very good at kind of isolating a skill that he thinks we need to work on for a certain bit of the game that, like he says, doesn't come up very much or happens very randomly, and then finding a way that he can coach that to, so that you get 50 goes at it in a session, whereas, like he says, in a tournament environment, you might only do that once over the whole tournament. So yeah, it's been good. And like he says, with us seeing him every day, like, it keeps it entertaining, it keeps it fun, and it keeps it varied, which keeps you concentrating.
My favourite is when the cone saves the shot instead of I do. That's what I like.
Subscribe to Inside the Circle now on all of your usual podcast providers. And so, building on something you guys were saying there about the number of hours and the number of repetitions you have to put in for something that may only happen once or twice. And I know, Harry, that's something we spoke about when you did the documentary with us just over a year ago. The amount of work you have to do for something that might not happen. But I guess when you're in a game situation and that one save or that one thing that you've been working on for so long does come off, how does that, maybe not at the time because you're in game mode, but for you as players and you as a coach, Hicko, how does that sort of make you feel when you see that what you've spent so long working on has actually paid off at a crucial time in a crucial game in a tournament?
So if I start there, look, growing up, I was a daydreamer. I dreamt of adventures and countries away from Australia and that type of thing. So in that respect, I'm still a daydreamer. I don't have any problem in saying that I finished the day and I'm dreaming about Amy, the save that I've seen her make at training that day, and thinking about how that will happen in a match. Then I might think about something that I've seen Gibbo working on for a period of time, and be pleased with that. So I think one of the important things with us as goalkeepers is filling our heads with really positive images of ourselves doing the right thing, of seeing how that will translate to a game. And as a coach, I'm still doing that. It's one of the best feelings that you can sort of get from it. By the same token, it doesn't worry me if that doesn't happen, because that is also just part of this sort of process. But definitely it gives you a kick from that sort of sense that, yeah, I'm still that daydreamer.
Yeah, I'd say it's funny because obviously a lot of the progress that we make is like extremely marginal, because we're training every day, we're already at an extremely high level. So like any performance, you're talking like tiny increments. But I think if I then look back at footage from me 2 years ago, like before Hiko turned up, and then look at footage now, like it's a completely different goalkeeper. So yeah, from that point of view, it's good to do that to kind of get that perspective. But yeah, like you say, like if there's some stuff that we've been specifically working on, whether it be a shootout skill or whether it's like a certain way of saving a certain ball, corner setup, whatever it is, and then yeah, like you say, to put that into action is extremely rewarding, and it will usually be something completely insignificant that no one else on the pitch notices. And you've made what looks like a really basic, easy save, but you're absolutely buzzing about it and no one else cares. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's very satisfying and rewarding. And it definitely like highlights that if you work on something enough, it will pay off eventually. Yeah, like I think for me, when a skill or something you've been working on becomes subconscious, I'm literally like, oh, this is the best thing ever. Because a lot of goalkeeping is, although you work on in the game just playing off instinct, a lot of training you are thinking about a lot of things, and you are, whether it's like how you're setting, like where the ball is, what's going on around you. And when you can just play off the things that you were thinking a lot about, and suddenly you can just do it through instinct, it's like very satisfying. And probably one of the big reasons that I like goalkeeping is that journey.
Another thing that is often said about goalkeepers, and those who listen to a very popular podcast, another very popular podcast on the BBC Sounds app, they actually had a discussion about sort of the goalkeepers union in football the other week. Is that a thing in hockey as well? Is that quite a strong thing, or is that something that's maybe talked about, but actually, goalkeepers, yeah, you do spend a lot of time together, but you get on just as well with everyone else in the squad?
I think goalies definitely experience things that outfielders wouldn't experience, which means that you have maybe a different level of connection that you wouldn't otherwise have with anyone else in the team. And it's almost impossible to relate to or empathize with unless you've been a goalie. So there's definitely that element, which means that yeah, you just look at a goal and you're like, I know what you're thinking or you're going through, because I've been there as well. But I do, like in the girls' side, like I get on with Maddie and Tabs really well as well. So I guess that's a part of it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, like the goalkeepers union bit is always like just general goalkeepers, like the ones you don't know. So like at tournaments and stuff, like there's always just that, when I've been number 2 and you're on the bench and then you walk past the other number 2 from the other team and you're like, yeah, I know. Like that silent nod.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it is definitely a thing. And I think it goes across sports as well. Like I know a few football goalkeepers and you have the same kind of connection, or you can talk about the same things because it is very similar. I know Hicko, you're very into ice hockey and stuff, but it definitely translates. It's a secret bond.
Does that translate into the goalkeeping coaches as well then, Mark?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what we're talking about is the word that Amy used there was empathy, and communities feel that empathy probably naturally. So, in terms of other goalkeeper coaches, whether it's across hockey or other sports, I think it's only natural that you feel a certain sort of empathy, respect for it. I think Amy mentioned it really well, an athlete to athlete type of situation when you reflect on what another athlete has done. And that's the case with goalkeepers and coaches in that to that sense as well. I mean, the word goalkeeper union, I certainly hear that probably a lot more in football. So I've heard that much more when I'm here in the UK versus probably in Australia. However, the bond or that community is exactly the same. I think no matter where you are sort of in the world or across different sports, as Gibbo sort of mentioned.
I guess it's probably the impossible question, because it's one of those where both scenarios are perfect. But as for you, Mark, as a goalkeeping coach, and for yourself, Amy and Harry, as goalkeepers, what is the perfect game or the perfect scenario for a goalkeeper? Is it a game where the team wins and you don't have much to do, or is it a game where actually you're really busy and you're pulling off saves left, right, and centre? What is like I said, the impossible question? What is the perfect scenario?
I'm interested to hear what the stars think.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like I don't think I've ever won man of the match in a game that we've won. Sorry. Like, do you know what I mean? Like the goalkeeper looks good when your team plays badly because he has a lot to do. And I think I'd say the perfect game is usually big games where both teams play well. So quarterfinals, semi-finals, finals, where both teams are playing at a high level. So you have some stuff to do, but not like, it's not like you're getting peppered. And like, I think of good games that I've played in, but we've got, smashed just because you're not quite at the races, or the other team's just performing at a really high level. I mean, the best case scenario is that you don't touch the ball. And if Danny was listening to this, he would say that. Like, that's the perfect game for the goalies. You do not touch the ball. But yeah, I don't know what you think about that, Amy.
I mean, there's one side of me which would be very satisfied with making a lot of saves, but then the other side of me which is equally as satisfied when the team plays well and I don't have much to do, because I think they're both, like, for me, good to see or good to feel. So I don't really know. I guess I'd probably just sit somewhere in the middle. That's not a very good answer, is it? But yeah, I would find equal satisfaction from both, I think.
That's fair enough. You make an interesting point there about games where you don't have much to do. And there are going to be times as goalkeepers where the ball is nowhere near you. You are almost by yourself because the defence isn't really coming towards you. And, in some cases you might have the crowd quite close to you and, they might be saying some things, or you might just be, there's not much for you to do. I guess how much of work is spent, maybe not with Hicko or maybe with Hicko, just sort of on those concentration levels and, being able to learn how to sort of switch on and maybe switch off and sort of deal with not just having stuff to do, but not having things to do in games.
Yeah, I think for me, I think it's an interesting one. I think you definitely develop it. I remember it being more of a thing as I was a kid. It was like being able to concentrate right to the end of games and stuff. I think it still applies. It's much easier in foreign countries where it's hot. Like if you've got nothing to do and it's freezing cold in like a Premier League away fixture at Brooklands, whatever, like that's tricky. I can't lie. That's not easy. But yeah, like when you're away and it's hot and there's, obviously this is the thing you train for. Like it's not too difficult to concentrate for 60 minutes. And, sometimes we'll do stuff at half time. I think we've done that before. Well, we've spent a lot of my career playing halves anyway, so you actually only have to concentrate for 30 minutes, which is useful. But yeah, it's a skill you work on, and loads of stuff goes into that. Fitness, mindfulness a little bit, like being able to cue into certain things and which allow you to, perform as well at the end of the game as you would at the start. But yeah, it's definitely a skill you can work on.
Definitely comes that. I think that's a big part of experience, isn't it? It comes with the experience of being able to be switched on more often and be switched on in the big moments. I think that kind of side came more from the psychologist rather than Hicko. Like Gibson mentioned, there's a big part about mindset, and yeah, that was definitely something I worked on with the psych. Yeah, I'm just also imagining when all you can think about is your freezing cold hands and your freezing cold feet, and you're like, stop, concentrate on the game, and you can't because you're just so cold. But as well, there's definitely ways you can stay involved. Like even if the ball's at the other end, you're communicating all the time, you're watching the game, you're moving around. So I think it doesn't really often feel like that because you're so involved in the game still.
I think that's something people will notice is just how vocal goalkeepers are, and I know there are different goalkeepers are slightly more or less vocal. Thinking of George Pinner here. Sometimes having to edit the training footage of sessions when George has been involved can be tricky because of some of the language he uses, but he's vocal. But all goalkeepers are vocal in their own ways. Is that something that Hicko that you encourage as a coach, or is that just sort of you let play out depending on each different personality type?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's going to be dependent on a few different things. Do we want goalkeepers to communicate? Absolutely, I would say, because that's part of teamsmanship. That's helping your team become better. It also gives you a connection to a wider community. So absolutely, that's something that we want. Is that going to be possible in all situations? Probably not, because sometimes, Gibbo's played in a World Cup in India with 15 to 20,000 people in a stadium. Amy's played in a World Cup here in the UK in London with, again, similar size crowds. Sometimes that communication at training at Bisham with a couple of kites flying around in the sky, when you can say whatever you want, and Will filming for GB video is not going to be possible. So you have to learn to be able to cope with both situations. So you certainly want the communication. You want to learn how to make it impactful. So by that, I mean, varying your tone when you speak, not just speaking all the time, but then also being able to cope and understanding that in big matches, in big tournaments, it might not be possible to do the same sort of level. So understanding that that's not a limiting factor to the team's performance. It might mean you can only communicate with one person who's relatively close.
Yeah, no, I definitely echo that. I think I've gone on a bit of a journey with that. I think I always have thought the goalkeeper had to, do all the communicating for everyone. And I think the first international tournaments I played in, I was just shouting at everyone all the time to make sure that stuff was heard and that messages were getting across, but actually it's not particularly effective, and you end up just, like Hiko says, it ends up becoming white noise. So yeah, I think for me now at the moment it's about picking your time and picking your messages and making sure that they are heard and delivered in the right way. for the maximum impact, for the whole team. So there'll be different people who are also vocalizing other stuff, and then you have to pick your time. But obviously the thing as a goalkeeper is that you have the whole view and you see more than everyone else at any given time. So you do have that responsibility to communicate messages when they need to be said. Yeah. And if you're not foghorn pinner, you have to put some effort into making sure your voice is heard and from the diaphragm.
Is that something you find as well then, Amy?
Yeah, definitely. And a big thing for me, like Hicko mentioned, is tone of voice. So I've heard a lot of goalies shouting when I've been watching games in various club hockey, international hockey, and the ones who are just like constantly like shouting, the same tone, the same volume, like it just ends up like you just stop listening to it. So yeah, a big one for me has been tone of voice when players are closer, just speak a bit quieter, which is hard for me because I'm a loud person. And yeah, just making sure it's concise. And another big thing is like, because you're a goalie, you're not as involved in like the emotion of the game necessarily as it goes on in front of you, because you might not be involved. So being able to motivate players and give them encouragement, or just give them a little chat about things they need to do better, is also a really big part of goalies and their communication, because you're almost a little bit removed from the emotion of the game at times.
I'd say that's a really good point. I think that's spot on. Goalkeepers have a responsibility to the rest of their team to be that emotionally level kind of soundboard. And it's like Amy says, it's one step removed, but then it's not the coaches who are another step removed. You kind of have that slight distance from what's happening in the game on the ball, which I think is really important and can allow you to deliver a kind of more impactful and personalised messages to certain players, especially the defence.
It's a really interesting point, and a lot of interesting points have been made throughout this episode, and I've really enjoyed putting it together, and I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to it. One thing we've sort of mentioned there is big games, big tournaments, and after a period of a year with very sporadic attempts to play any sorts of hockey whatsoever because of the pandemic, we, fingers crossed, we'll have quite a lot of games, quite a lot of tournaments, quite a lot of big things coming up in the next few months. So I guess from all of your perspectives, what are you just most looking forward to about the next three to 4 months, starting with Hicko?
Look, and if we ignore obviously the wider situation, which is we want a world that is improving and coming out of the pandemic that we're involved in. So I think, as Gibbo and Amy have both mentioned, we all feel immensely grateful that we get to live the lives that we're living. So if we ignore that sort of greater part, then I'd say that the next 3 months are months that I hope lead us towards the Olympics, that they'll be celebrated. I think Japan will do a great job with it. In terms of a performance there, I don't want to focus too much on that, but I'd like to think more about all of the goalkeepers, know that within the next 3 months, they're going to get the opportunity to do everything that they possibly can do to put themselves in the best possible spot to be selected for that group.
How about yourself, Harry?
The pandemic has kind of taught me, especially just to kind of take it one day at a time and hope that you can, just give your best on any given day and not expect too much from the future. But obviously we are getting very close to crunch time in terms of the Olympic selection and the build up to that. So yeah, it's I'm looking forward to getting into some kind of what feels like more normal procedure for us, which is being able to get some games under your belt, prepare in the way that you would, and just kind of get back into that rhythm, because it's been very, very sporadic over the last 18 months, 2 years. So it's exciting. It's definitely exciting, and it would just be nice to get out there and kind of put all the work that we've done over the last however long onto the pitch, and like you say, hopefully get some of those moments where it's like, oh, I'm glad I had an extra 18 months to work on that save because it's just pulled off in an Olympic final or something. But it's exciting times.
And then finally, Amy, what about you?
I'm looking forward to the challenge of pushing myself as far as I can, both in terms of on pitch and also off pitch. And a big thing for me is feeling like my teammates kind of value me and respect me, and I'm really looking forward to kind of supporting them in their journeys over the next few months, at the same time as pushing myself. I think that kind of like makes me feel good as a person. So yeah.
Brilliant. 3 great answers there. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us, and wishing you all the very best, and can't wait to see what you'll get up to over the next few weeks. Thank you again to Mark, Harry and Amy for joining us and giving us a brilliant insight into the role of a goalkeeping coach. Thank you to you as well for listening, and make sure you tune back in next week. In the meantime, you can also subscribe to Inside the Circle, the podcast, brought to you by our principal partner Vitality, on all of your usual podcast providers.